Carbank gets trickier and more ambitious. In other cybercrime news, ransomware takes off after more databases. There's a new ransomware-as-a-service offering in the black market. A new strain of Android ransomware hits Russian-speaking users. Locky's back, but in a feeble sort of way. Cybercriminals lock files at a cancer service not-for-profit. Russian policy wonks seem to suggest that we're not at the point in history where 2016 yielded to 2017. Instead, calling all cold warriors, 1948 just ticked over into 1949. Time for a message from our sponsor, E8 Security. We're talking about putting your data together with E8's analytics for security that can handle the unknown unknowns. Consider what might warn you to malware on your system. Listening or running programs on a rare or never-seen-before open port is one of them. It's easy to say that, but could you say what counted as rare or never seen before? Or would that information jump out at you as you reviewed logs? If you had time to review your logs, and by the time the logs reached you, the news would be old. But E8's analytical tools recognize and flag that threat at once, enabling you to detect, hunt, and respond. Get the white paper at e8security.com/DHR and get started. That's e8security.com/DHR. E8 Security, your trusted partner. And we thank E8 for sponsoring our show. Major funding for the CyberWire podcast is provided by Cylance. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary and week in review for Friday, January 20th, 2017. There's a fair amount of extortion news at week's end. Ransomware criminals who've been hitting Elasticsearch and MongoDB databases have begun to devote similar attention to CouchDB and Hadoop. The tools for attacking MongoDB and Elasticsearch, as well as a list of vulnerable installations, are now being sold by Kraken Zero on the black market for about $500. The attacks on databases have been unusually damaging, sometimes wiping the data beyond reasonable prospect of recovery. Elsewhere in the criminal markets, the Satan ransomware-as-a-service is being offered to criminals who lack the time, resources, or technical chops to come up with their own attacks. They offer a wizard to walk aspiring crime lords through the process, as criminal markets and the ways the goods for sale there are designed and hawked continue to ape legitimate markets. Bleeping Computer has the details through researcher Xylitol. They offer a very thorough look at Satan, the malware, not the fallen angel. Unfortunately, there's so far no readily available way of decrypting files that fall victim to Satan, so remember to back up your data. Fortinet has discovered a new strain of Android ransomware that targets Russian-speaking users. It's unusual in at least two respects. First, its demand is very large, 545,000 rubles, about $9,100, at least an order of magnitude more than the cost of the Android devices whose screen it locks. Second, it asks for payment by credit card as opposed to the customary cryptocurrency. This suggests several possibilities. Android endpoints are highly valued in certain markets, or the hoods behind this one are inexperienced or overreaching, or the goal is actually carding, perhaps as gravy on top of the main course of extortion. Locky ransomware seems to be making a minor comeback after its temporary eclipse during the holidays, but it may be on its way to supersession by the Spora ransomware strain. An unusually repellent extortion attack has hit an Indiana cancer services not-for-profit. The Muncie-based Red Door has seen its files encrypted. Police are investigating, but it's worth noting that even the most benign and uncontroversial not-for-profits can find themselves in cybercriminals' crosshairs. Back your files up. And if you're a security professional looking for a chance to do some pro bono work, take a look around at your favorite charities and consider offering your services. Trustwave and Forcepoint are tracking the evolution of Carbank. The gang, long known for attacks on financial services that are thought to have brought in something north of a cool $1 billion, have begun, as we noted yesterday, to use legitimate Google services for their command and control traffic. It's worth noting that Forcepoint and Trustwave have said they've reached out to Google for some cooperative way of addressing this problem. What's equally interesting is the way in which Carbank seems to have expanded their target set. They now appear to be going after businesses in the retail and hospitality sectors, too. Many observers are talking about a de facto state of cyber war between the United States and Russia, which seems overstated, where, for example, is the physical destruction, to say nothing of the casualties one associates with warfare. But it might not be an exaggeration to call it a de facto state of cyber cold warfare. This is especially so since what we now call information operations were prominently featured in the first Cold War as propaganda, disinformation, running agents of influence, and so on. But the Washington Post has a piece on a speech one of President Putin's advisors gave back in February that seems to offer a look at cyberspace under Eastern eyes. Andrei Krutskik told Infoforum 2016 that we're living in 1948. That is, we're living in the last year of the U.S. monopoly of nuclear weapons. In 1949, Krutskik said, Truman had no choice but to start taking the USSR, aka Russia, seriously. Krutskik promised that in cyberspace we were about to move into 1949. If he's right, one hopes there's a George Kennan for the cyber age out there. If there is, we'll read his or her forthcoming long telegram with interest. As the Trump administration takes office, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani has been designated as a lead for cybersecurity policy. The role is more facilitator than director, still less czar, but the appointment has attracted attention because of the patchy security on Mr. Giuliani's consultancy's website. We heard from Mike Patterson, CEO of Plixer International, who sees a lesson here for everyone. The problems with Giuliani's website, Patterson says, quote, reinforce the magnitude of the problem they face coming into office. When it comes to targeted attacks, which they will definitely be facing, there is almost no defense. Because of this, they may consider entirely new communication methods with all new hardware and software protocols. This will make bridging their discussions to the internet very difficult and, as a result, much more secure. He foresees air gaps and toughness on crime. Finally, are we forgetting anything? Oh, there's apparently some big event going on about 40 miles south of us today. What'd we miss? Right, just kidding. It's Inauguration Day down in the District of Columbia. Wherever you are, and if you're in the United States, whomever you voted for, we hope you'll join us in wishing both President Obama and President Trump the best of luck as they step into the next phase of their and our lives. Time for a moment from our sponsor, NetSparker. You know how to tell a false positive from a real threat? NetSparker does. If it's exploitable, it's real. NetSparker's distinctive automated scans drive out the false positives, save you money, and improve security. Their approach is proof-based scanning. NetSparker's innovative scanning engine automatically exploits the vulnerabilities it identifies in websites and presents you with a proof of exploit. You don't need to verify the scanner findings to see if they include false positives. If NetSparker tells you it's bad, trust them, it's bad. Remember, if it's exploitable, then it is definitely not a false positive. Learn more at netsparker.com. But wait, there's more. And we really do mean more. Go to netsparker.com/cyberwire for a free 30-day trial of NetSparker Desktop. It's fully functional. Scan your websites with NetSparker and let them show you how they do it. That's netsparker.com/cyberwire. And we thank NetSparker for sponsoring our show. Joining me once again is Emily Wilson. She's the Director of Analysis for Terbium Labs. Emily, we've sort of been making our way through the report that you put out recently, separating fact from fiction, the truth about the dark web. I think, myself included, I think a lot of people have this perception that the dark web is full of, terrorists and bad guys. But your report sort of brought out the fact that maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, it's definitely a question that we get asked fairly frequently, and understandably so. You know, this is a situation where people want to know what kinds of things are taking place and what's considered to be a more kind of unregulated part of the internet. And, you know, we ran into some interesting situations here, both with extremism, a category for weapons, and then a category for what we called weapons of mass destruction, you know, sort of an absence of evidence issue, right? You know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's merely kind of an indication of rarity. And so we found one incident of extremism in the work that we were doing, in the sample that we took. Again, the study is based on a random sample of URLs. And we thought that was really interesting because, you know, these events are some of the most popular topics of conversation for people who are first looking at the dark web. Once you get past drugs and fraud, then you naturally turn to kind of more extreme, nasty activity. And really, these things are very rare. That's interesting for a few reasons, right? Because one, just because they're rare doesn't mean they don't happen. We certainly see extremism pop up from time to time, whether you're dealing with, a Mujahideen handbook or the official ISIS site that popped up, I guess that was last fall, and was quickly taken down by Anonymous, or something like weapons, where we know that weapons exist on the dark web. We've seen them. We know kind of where they are, but we didn't see any in our sample, which I think is a really good indicator of how rare these things actually are. But I think the other thing to keep in mind about weapons is to take that with a grain of salt. The larger and more intricate the weapon, the more you run into an issue of how are you actually going to ship that?
Right. This doesn't mean that ISIS isn't online. It just means that ISIS chooses not to use this particular locality to do their business. Sure, and I think that there is a tendency to lose the nuance in encrypted and anonymous communication as necessarily being on the dark web. I think it's a few things, right? So certainly encrypted communications and fully private communications are important to people who are trying to plan and carry out kind of terrible attacks. I think also, there are plenty of Tor hidden services, and our study was based on just kind of a sample of Tor hidden services in this case. There are plenty of hidden services that are designed to never be shared or are designed to be shared with a select group of individuals. And when you are dealing with something that is that important, it is unlikely that that link is going to get out to anyone else. And so it's going to be very difficult to measure or capture or find. All right, Emily Wilson, always interesting. Thanks for joining us. Time to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Cylance. Are you looking for something beyond legacy security approaches? Of course you are. So you're probably interested in something that protects you at machine speed and that recognizes malware for what it is, no matter how the bad guys have tweaked the binaries or cloaked their malice in the appearance of innocence. Cylance knows malware by its DNA. Their solution scales easily, and it protects your network with minimal updates, less burden on your system resources, and limited impact on your network and your users. Find out how Cylance is revolutionizing security with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It may be artificial intelligence, but it's real protection. Visit Cylance.com to learn more about the next generation of anti-malware. Cylance, artificial intelligence, real threat prevention. And we thank Cylance for sponsoring our show. My guest today is Simone Petrella. She's the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at CyberVista, where she leads product development and delivery of cybersecurity training and education curriculums, as well as workforce initiatives for executives, cyber practitioners, and continuing education.
I actually think that one of the best things that's happening to the cybersecurity workforce discussion right now is a widening of that aperture to people that have different disciplines in their background. I think one of the biggest misnomers in cybersecurity is that it really is one particular technically niche field. And in reality, it's not. It's multidisciplinary. And so what really makes an organization and individual successful when they go into cybersecurity is bringing that wealth and breadth and depth of background into their particular functional task. And so, I can tell you from my own personal experience, I had a lot of success on the threat intelligence side, hiring either people who are trained as attorneys or were former attorneys because of the critical thinking and the assessment components. And we were able to train them up on the technical skills required to specifically focus on cybersecurity after the fact. I think there is just a huge benefit to even just pursuing those backgrounds as a foundational baseline for those that want to get interested in cybersecurity. Frankly, that's what makes the field so exciting right now is there are really jobs and skill sets that require people to have a wide spectrum of skill sets. So it's not just an area that needs to be the purview of only the hyper-technical.
And what are you hearing from the employers? Are they saying that the people coming out of school are properly prepared, or is there a gap there?
No, unfortunately, the vast amount of employers, and there's a very interesting study that had been done by CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies, and Intel Security around this very issue. And by and large, employers surveyed found that the people they were bringing onto jobs were out of university were not properly prepared for the job tasks that they were expected to perform once they gained employment. So there's still a gap.
Can you contrast some of the differences in skills that the private sector versus the public sector are looking for?
Yeah. So the biggest contrast when it comes to private versus public sector is that the private sector to date currently has a completely defensive mission. So in the government sector, there is clearly an emphasis on defense, but there's also a significant amount of expenditure in time and resources on offensive capabilities and exploitation activities. And those are, definitely appealing for those that are the most hands-on in proactively going out and doing things on networks. The commercial sector is for, authority and legal and just economic reasons focused on the defense of their own networks. And so that is in particular not only very focused on defense, but it's an increased focus on the integration of all the disciplines within cybersecurity that contribute to that defense. So it's not just whether you have a background in vulnerability management and are identifying which applications are updated to which point and which ones need patches, and then how are you actually monitoring the activity that's going on a network on a day-to-day basis, but how is the output or information you're receiving from any one of those disciplines feeding the decisions and business operations of its adjacent units. And that integration and optimization of how those defensive capabilities work together is extremely critical in commercial, just because they've had less time to really put it together. Whereas, in the government sector, the DoD in particular has had a longer runtime to really get that right.
What would your advice be to the employers in such a highly competitive environment where, they're vying for the most talented people? What are the ways, in your opinion, that they can set themselves apart from the other people trying to hire those skilled workers?
To set themselves apart. I think the hardest thing is now the way that's currently happening is usually through salary and incentive programs. My recommendation to employers is to take more of a community-based approach to how they look at their staffing. The beauty of cybersecurity as a profession is it really is cross-functional. And so the job functions of a cybersecurity professional in the healthcare market are not terribly dissimilar to what you would need to do in the financial services sector. You need the context of what you're protecting. And so I think there needs to be more of a community model in the actual industry to pool the resources that they're currently spending to either create on-the-job training programs and very costly training opportunities, and maybe put in a fraction of that amount to essentially create a bigger pool of candidates that they all can select from. Because right now they're fighting over the same very small, finite pool of candidates.
I understand you're the chair for industry for the upcoming NICE conference. What do you want people to know about that?
I would love people to know that the NICE conference, which is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, is the wonderful opportunity for employers, academic, industry, and government to come together and really identify ways as a community to solve the cybersecurity workforce issue. And employers in particular really have a operative seat at that table in order to articulate the most required skill sets that they need, while there's an audience of government and academia and training providers who have the capabilities and willingness to build curriculums to actually serve that potential population. So it should be a wonderful time. It's going to be November 7th and 8th of 2017 at the Dayton Convention Center in Dayton, Ohio.
That's Simone Petrella from CyberVista. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, along with interviews, our glossary, and more, visit thecyberwire.com. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible, and special thanks to our sustaining sponsor, Cylance. Learn more about how Cylance prevents cyber attacks at cylance.com. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. Our editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben, and our technical editor is Chris Russell. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Have a great weekend, everybody.